here this morning. Sunday, 8 a.m., St. Patrick's Day weekend. This is an impressive showing here in Chicago especially. My name is Jeff Curley. I'm a co-founder of iCivics, and I have the pleasure of introducing Justice O'Connor this morning and having a chance to have a question and answer with you all. Obviously, Justice O'Connor requires no introduction, so I'm going to keep my remarks very brief and then let her take the floor. But Justice O'Connor was the first woman to serve on the United States Supreme Court.
But not the last.
Not the last. Her incredible accomplishments are extraordinary, particularly given the era in which she began her career. Sandra Day O'Connor was born in El Paso, Texas, and now let's see if we have any Arizonans here. She grew up on her family ranch, the Lazy Bee, in Arizona.
And New Mexico.
And New Mexico. Lots of places to call home.
No, but the ranch was in both states.
Yes.
And the only reason I got to El Paso was there wasn't any town near the Lazy Bee. No hospital. I was the first child. My mother thought it would be good to have a hospital. So off we went to El Paso. And I ended up going to school in El Paso. So all the things you hear today that might be kind of crazy, it's because I went to school in El Paso.
Well, when she left El Paso
I did,
in 1946, she was accepted at Stanford University, where she earned her bachelor's degree in economics and continued her studies at the law school. She completed her law degree in 2 years.
No.
No?
No.
That's a lie.
Took 3. I finished my undergraduate in 3.
She completed both in 5 years.
Yeah. Right.
Which is quite impressive. And right alongside her at graduation was another future Supreme Court Justice, William Rehnquist. In
my law school class. Isn't that amazing? And we used to play bridge and charades. And we had, Stanford didn't have any housing for graduate women in those days, not a single place. And so I found a room in the home of an old lady whose husband had been head of the School of Education at Stanford, and he died. And she rented rooms out in her house for graduate women. And we had to run the household. We took turns cooking, if you can imagine, for the whole group. And we would have, about once a week, we'd plan something for bridge and or charades, and we'd get Bill Rehnquist over there for all that. So we had good times.
That's an impressive bridge club.
Yeah.
The Justice started her career in public service, first as a state assistant attorney general, and was later elected to the Arizona Senate. In 1972, she became the first female in the country to serve as majority leader of a state senate. Shortly thereafter, she was appointed to the Arizona Court of Appeals, and in 1981, she was nominated by President Reagan and confirmed unanimously by the Senate to serve as a justice on the U.S. Supreme Court.
Well, it was 99-0. And the 100th vote was that of the senator from Montana, Max Baucus. And he couldn't be there that day. So he was very nice. He wrote me a letter, told me he was sorry he couldn't be there. He would have voted yes. And he sent me a copy of A River Runs Through It. Have you read that? So that's how it all worked out.
The Justice served the court with distinction for 25 years. Her important opinions on privacy, discrimination, religious freedom continue to shape our national conversation. In 2009, President Obama awarded Justice O'Connor with America's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Since stepping down from the bench, Justice O'Connor has dedicated her tireless energy to restoring civics education in the U.S. Under her leadership, she founded iCivics in 2009, and in that short time, she has led our organization to reaching more than 60,000 educators and 2 million students around the country each year. We look forward to Justice O'Connor's remarks this morning. We're going to be passing around note cards at the end of her remarks for you to have a chance to ask questions. Those questions will be received up here, and we'll have a chance to have a conversation following the Justice's remarks. So please now join me in welcoming Justice Sandra Day O'Connor.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm really glad to be here today with all of you because you are working with young people across this country, trying to prepare them to deal with the many challenges we all have. And I really commend you because the work of educators matters as much or more than anything anybody could do in this country. The only way we're going to continue on a trajectory that will help our country is if we have good educators who are willing to work with our young people generation after generation and keep us going. So I appreciate so much what you do, and I think it's so important. And my life has been intersecting a little bit more with teachers and school administrators and educators in recent years since we started this iCivics thing. And I'm just very glad to have this chance to meet with you. As you heard, I grew up on a cattle ranch in the Southwest, and that shaped a lot of what I am today. It guided me. I guess I continue to be a cowgirl at heart, but other chapters in my life have added to my beliefs and experiences as time went on. And my experiences on the Supreme Court and following are what put me in the position I have today of a commitment to civic learning in America. But let me take you back to an earlier time for a minute, if I could. When I graduated from Stanford Law School, I could not get a job. I'd gotten engaged to John O'Connor, who was also in law school. I was a year ahead of him, so we planned to get married, and that meant one of us had to work, and that was me. And when I got out of law school, I couldn't get a job. Now, I was about third, I guess, in my graduating class. You'd think that would have helped a little bit. It didn't. The only thing that mattered was that I was a woman, and it was really a problem. And I heard that the San Mateo County attorney had once had a woman lawyer on his staff, and I thought that was a good sign, so I wrote to him and asked if I could have a time to meet with them about a job. And he wrote back and he said, well, he didn't have any money to hire another deputy, but he'd be happy to meet with me anyway. And so I went to the office of the county attorney in San Mateo County. It's in Redwood City, California. And we had a nice visit. He was very pleasant. And he just said, in addition to not having any money from the supervisors to hire another deputy, I don't have an office space to put another employee right now. So I went back to the Lazy Bee Ranch and wrote him a letter. And I said that I knew that he didn't have money right then to hire another deputy, but I'd work for him for nothing until such time as he eventually got some money. He said, it doesn't matter. That's what I'd like to be doing. You don't have to pay me. I'll go to work there. And I said, now I know you don't have an empty office, but I met your secretary and she's very nice. And if she didn't object, we could put my desk in her office. There's room, and that would be fine with me. So that was my first job as a lawyer out of law school. I didn't get paid, and I put my desk in with the secretary. But I loved my work. It was really fun. I just really liked what I was doing. And I stayed there long enough that in due course, I actually got paid and I got an office. So it all works out at some point. But I think that early experience with a local government agency made me realize that I had some role to play, possibly, in how our nation functions at its basic level, and that really the process of improving our nation occurs at every level, even the lowest one. So it worked out, and I went on from that humble beginning in San Mateo County, California, to being an assistant attorney general for Arizona. And then I became a state senator in Arizona. I ran for that and was elected. And then my colleagues made me Senate Majority Leader. And so that was a very interesting position to hold. I liked that. And then I was put on the Arizona Court of Appeals. I'd been a trial court judge for a while. And I was put on the Court of Appeals, which I enjoyed. And I got a phone call one day from the White House. Turned out the White House was going to send somebody to meet with me and talk to me. And 3 people showed up at my door. One of them was Ken Starr. Remember that name? And so we met all day, and we were some distance from downtown. I wasn't near any restaurants, so I fixed lunch. And I'm not a bad cook, so lunch was probably pretty good. And we had a nice visit. And from that day on, my life changed, that's for sure. Because what happened next was I was in my office at the Court of Appeals in Arizona, and the phone rang, and it was the White House. Well, okay. It was the president. Oh, well, all right. And it was Ronald Reagan on the phone. I could tell from his voice, actually. And he said, "Sandra, I'd like to announce your appointment tomorrow for the Supreme Court of the United States. Is that okay with you?" It's kind of a surprise call. And I said, "Well, yes, Mr. President, I think it is." And I was really pleased and privileged to have had the opportunity to serve on the Supreme Court for 25 years. Goodness. And when I retired, which was in 2006, I had served for a long time, and I wasn't a spring chicken at that point. But I had a goal that was still high on my list of things that maybe I could help accomplish. And that was to help restore, as part of our education system for young people, some programs in civics education. How does our country run? How does it work? And how are we all part of it? How are you young people part of it in the schools? And that was what I wanted to do. I saw so much evidence during my 25 years on the court that there was a misunderstanding, in large part, by many people about the function and role of the courts and lawyers. Lawyers were way down the list of people we like and don't like. They were in the don't like column. And we got public schools in this country about 30 years after we got our Constitution, after we started our form of government here. And at that point, we didn't have schools. And people began saying, now look, we got this pretty good constitution, and we're proud of that. And wouldn't it be a good idea if we educated all of our young people about how our government works? That would be a good thing to do. That was how we got public schools. And the knowledge of citizenship, really, you don't inherit that through your parents, even if they're good citizens. You don't inherit it, you have to learn it. And they have to be learned by every generation. And I think as a nation, we've been pretty good at responding to crises in the country when we've had them. We've done okay with economic disaster, with war, with other problems. But when it comes to long-term development of things, we haven't been as effective as a nation, I think, as we could be. And I think that's been the case for learning about civics, how our government runs. And my years on the court, and there were a lot of them, I told you I was there 25 years, but I got more and more concerned about threats to the notion of an independent judiciary. And there were lots of efforts from many quarters in the country to politicize our courts, to unduly influence them, I thought. And some of the attacks on judges, I thought, were both unfounded and really hateful. And we saw some evidence in the Congress when we had contact with members of Congress of a real distrust of courts and of lawyers and judges. And it concerned me. And it stemmed, I concluded, primarily from ignorance out there about our system of checks and balances and about the value and importance to our country of having an independent judiciary to be sure we do have a rule of law. Because I think most of us have paid lip service to that notion anyway. But to really have it work, you do need an independent judiciary. And the facts are fairly compelling. Civic scores in high schools have declined, even since 2006. But civic scores among middle school students have stayed about the same. They haven't gone down, but they haven't improved. And on the last nationwide civics assessment test, 2/3 of the students scored below proficient. Now that's not a good score. And it tells me we really have work to do in the schools with people to teach how government is organized and runs and how we're all part of it and how those students are part of it. Only about 1/3 of American adults can name the 3 branches of government. Only 1/3. And they certainly can't describe their role in our system. Only 7% of 8th graders can name the 3 branches. Now that's pathetic. Come on. Some of you must, how many of you get 8th grade students? Anybody out there? Yeah, they can't name the 3 branches. And less than 1/3 of 8th graders can identify the historical purpose of the Declaration of Independence, and it's right there in the title. Now, come on. I mean, we're in bad shape. 2/3 of Americans cannot name a single Supreme Court justice, and only 1 in 7 can correctly identify John Roberts as our Chief Justice at present. Less than 1/5 of high school seniors can explain how citizen participation helps our democracy. Now, these statistics, bad as they are even more troubling when you realize that they're compounded by disparities in income and racial problems. And there's a huge civic achievement gap between students from disadvantaged backgrounds and their more economically well-off peers. And we need to remember that providing our citizens with the knowledge and the skills needed to be functioning citizens of this country was the main reason we got public schools in America. That's why we got them. We didn't have them when we adopted the Constitution. And a group of well-meaning, interested people started going around the country and saying, now look, we adopted a good Constitution and a form of government, and that's fine, but we're going to need schools to educate our young people about it and what their role is. That's why we got schools. And so we know that a good quality civic education or learning does help students develop their skills they need in the 21st century. They need to think somewhat critically about issues. They need to understand what that is, to identify a problem and think it through. And they need to engage in some thoughtful and respectful discussion and exchange of ideas with even their peers from different backgrounds. You know, we have very different backgrounds in this country. And we need, as young people, to learn how to mix it up and have good discussion among all of us. And we need to understand and teach the young people to understand the political processes we have, so that we can address the challenges we have now and are going to face in the future as a nation. And I think teaching the skills of citizenship is pretty difficult, and that's what you're faced with. I don't think it's going to get any easier, and I think we need it as badly as ever. So what you do matters. Only 29 states require students to take even one civics or government course to get out of high school. Did you know that? Only 29 states. So we're not doing too well on that score. Only 19 states include civics as part of their statewide assessment systems. And for middle schools, that's the group I love best. They're great. They are really eager to learn, and they like teachers. I mean, they're good. We like middle school. But only 4 states include a civics course for middle schools. That's not enough. It really is not enough. And so the picture is bleak, but I guess it's not hopeless. We do see some positive signs of change. I appreciate the number of people, including educators and parents and students and public officers, who are speaking up today and saying, look, we need to make some improvements and some change, and we want to. So that encourages me. And the campaign for the civic mission of schools, which I co-chaired with member Lee Hamilton of Indiana. He was the national chairman. And we've identified 6 promising practices that maybe can revitalize civic learning in our schools. And they include providing some classroom instruction in government, history, law, and democracy. I mean, those things are what we're talking about. And we need to include those things in our teaching programs for these young people. And we need to incorporate in classrooms some discussion of current local, national, and international issues and events. Those that students can understand are important to them too. We need to make sure we talk about some of those things. And we need to design and implement programs that let students have the chance to apply what they've been talking about in community service by actually getting involved and doing some form of community service. I think it's great if schools can find opportunities for students to be out there and actually work on something that helps in the way of community service. And it's good if there are extracurricular activities for students that are more involved with their schools and or their communities. So, and it helps if the young people get involved in school governance. There are lots of positions in school that they can take if they will. And I think we need to simulate the democratic way that we deal with problems, with discussion and voting and deliberation about what changes would make a difference, and practice a little diplomacy inside the classrooms. So I worked with some people who share these concerns, and what emerged with the help of a great group of teacher advisors. You teachers have a lot of talent. And I latched on to some whom I could identify that were closer to me geographically. And that's what resulted in the creation of iCivics. It's that website that we have to try to help teach these things that we've been talking about, and to have ways for students to become engaged. So if you haven't, how would a cowgirl from Arizona be involved in video games? I don't know, but there it is. And if you play in iCivics, you can be a citizen leader or a lawyer or a judge or a member of Congress or even president. And you can learn how civic processes work by really experiencing them in some of these problems. And best of all, you know what? iCivics is free. We don't charge. So I think it's a help. And one of our we have two recent things that I'm excited about. One of them is a game we call We the Jury. And it helps the young people, the students, understand the jury system and how it works and functions. And that's good, because they're all going to have to do that someday. We have a teaching module now called Drafting Board, and it teaches the students how to do some research and then write good essays to put forward some specific problem-solving thing. And it's a good thing. I think it works. The feedback so far from teachers and students and the communities has been very, very positive. And I think that what I'm hearing from teachers is that iCivics is what we call it. Why iCivics? It's because we have iPads and iPods and everything, so I thought we might as well have iCivics, okay? That's the reason. Anyway, the young people who use it say that the games are fun and cooling, and about half of the students who learn a game during the evaluation period go home and play the games at home without being asked at all, and that's very encouraging, you know. I hear a lot of that from teachers. So I think these stories are encouraging, and there are so many opportunities. Now I'm going to stop talking because I think Jeff over here is getting very impatient. And we're going to turn it back over to him to see what we ought to do now.
That's great. Thank you,
Okay.
Justice. So I'm going to ask a few questions. If you all have questions that you'd like to ask, just raise your hand and we'll pass around note cards for you to submit questions for the Justice.
And we might or might not get to
And
all
we
of
might
them.
or might not get to all of them. We'll see.
Yeah.
So I want to go back in time a little bit if we
Okay.
can. Your first book was called Lazy Bee. You wrote it with your brother, Alan.
About the ranch.
About the ranch.
Now that's a good book. You ought to try it. It's in paperback now.
It is a very good book. And in that book, you write that being on the ranch, you and your brother learned how to be responsible for the care and the maintenance of your livestock and your equipment. I'm interested if you could reflect a little bit about what it was like growing up on a ranch and how that may have informed who you
Oh, I don't know, it was fabulous, because you do have a lot of responsibilities. If you're out on a ranch, you have a lot of cattle to take care of, and they can't talk back to you, so you have to figure out what they really need and provide it. And what happens is you'll be riding around the ranch and discover that the water isn't flowing from some well where the cattle are there hoping to get a drink, and they don't have any water coming in. Well, that's an emergency. It really is. And you have to get out there and solve that. Figure out why the water stopped and do something about it instantly and get the thing working again. So you have lots of practical, hands-on experience in observing what's going wrong and solving it. And no matter what age you are or how you're equipped, you have to learn to be a problem solver. And that's a good thing, I guess.
I think we have a lot of problem solvers in this room, probably.
Yeah, I think we do. See, these teachers do the same thing. You run into an emergency or an unanticipated problem, and you've got to solve it. You can't call 5 or 6 people and have them give you a proposal. You have to get it solved.
So I'm curious to know what, you obviously went to high school in El Paso, what kind of civics education you had growing up?
Well, we had some in those days in El Paso, believe it or not, and but it was kind of boring. That's the thing, you have to keep it from being boring. And I guess one of the ways you do that is find ways to have the students actually engaged in some fashion in doing something. Maybe getting the city council to do a new bike path or do something anyway. Get them involved and engaged.
Very good. Do you have any reflections regarding the impact of Ronald Reagan elevating you as the first woman to the Supreme Court? I believe you've said it was only 191 years in the making.
That's all it took. 191 years. But President Reagan was running for the presidency, and he started his campaign in California in the West, and he did not think that he was getting much of an enthusiastic response from women. And he started thinking that he really needed to say things and do things that would be more appealing to women voters. And I think that was one of the things that was behind his effort to say, well, if I got a chance, if you elect me president, I'd like to put a qualified woman on the Supreme Court. That was one of his so-called campaign things. I don't know how many votes that would have produced, but at least that was one of the things he said. And he was elected, and within a few months, Justice Potter Stewart announced his retirement from the court. Boom. There was a situation that required the president to think about who he was going to put on the court. And that's kind of a big decision, particularly in his circumstances.
It certainly was.
Yeah.
And I take it you were surprised when you made that call?
Yes, I was sitting in my chambers at the Court of Appeals in Arizona when the phone rang. And hello, this is the White House speaking. Can we reach Justice O'Connor? So there he was on the phone. Sandra? Yes, Mr. President. I'd like to announce your nomination tomorrow for the Supreme Court. Is that all right with you? Well, I mean, what are you going to say? I don't know. So here I am.
So here you are.
Yeah.
So you and John moved to Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
I know some people may have noticed you've been on television quite a bit recently. Your most recent book is Out of Order.
Yes.
Thank you. I think it shares some of the unique stories
Well,
of the court.
yeah, I had recently wrote another book, and it includes some episodes from the Supreme Court's history that are very interesting, and most people don't know those stories. You know, you just don't grow up in school learning about these events at the court. So there was a lot of good material to work from.
Can you share a little bit of insider perspective on what it was like to work on the court, the dynamic among the justices?
Well, it's great deal of hard work, to tell you the truth, and the court has to review thousands and thousands of petitions for certiorari that's a good word, teacher student, certiorari, how about that? Anyway, they're filed with the court month in and month out from individuals, corporations, institutions, and so forth, saying, this is the case that I want the court to consider. This is the involvement that I or my entity has with the problem, and this is what we see about it in terms of the authorities out there, and please take the case to solve it. And so the justices have to review those month in and month out. They come in throughout the year, these petitions. And then periodically, a group of them are put on the agenda for the justices to discuss. And it takes the agreement of at least 4 of the 9 justices to accept a case for review by the court. If you get 4 votes, that's enough. You don't need 5. You can get 5, that's better. But 4 will do it, and it takes just a majority vote of the participating justices to accept it, put it on the court's calendar. And when that happens, then the parties in the case are advised, and they're given a schedule, a time within which they have to file their arguments in written form called briefs. I don't know why we call them brief, because they aren't brief, they're long written arguments. But anyway, that's what happens. We get those, and then we schedule an oral argument at the court in due course after the briefs have been filed. And in the early days of the court, there were no time limits. The lawyers would come, they didn't have that many cases, and it was the entertainment in DC. And it was socially desirable for the, major players to come sit in the courtroom and hear the oral arguments, and no time limits for the oral arguments. So they went on endlessly, which was not good. Now we give them a maximum of an hour, and that's enough in most cases. It usually is. So what else?
Wonderful. We have a question from the audience. What would your message be specific to middle school girls about future desires to be successful?
Well, the essential message is that there are great opportunities for young people, male and female, all across the spectrum, in private employment, in public employment, where in volunteer service, whatever it is, and that they can anticipate and expect to be able to serve in a whole wide array of categories. Nothing is really precluded anymore, and the opportunities are going to be there. So they need to learn. You need to encourage them to learn, to read quickly and to write well. If there were 2 things I could give a student, that would be it. Read fast and write well. You'll go very far if you can do those things. So I don't know how you encourage them to do that, but those are pretty desirable.
Those are very desirable. I think one of the things that most people don't know about your quote-unquote retirement years is that although you've retired from the Supreme Court, you're still a sitting Article III judge.
Yes, I serve as a volunteer judge now. I mean, just so I don't totally lose the hang of it. So we have our federal courts are serving in geographic regions called circuits. And that just means it's a chunk of the country that's divided up. And each circuit has a group of judges who sit on cases at the appellate level for the circuit. And I volunteer to sit as a member of those circuit court panels around the country. I can't do them all, but I go to some because it's kind of fun. It's back in the saddle, so to speak, with interesting issues of federal law, and you get to sit with, typically in those courts of appeal, they sit in groups of 3. So it would be me and 2 others, and it's often judges whom I've at least met at some time in the past, or if not, it's a pleasure to meet them because I know about them. And we'll sit and hear the oral arguments and write opinions. And then an appeal can be taken from that opinion up to the Supreme Court. I've had a couple of cases already decided at that level, me as a volunteer, that then the Supreme Court has taken. And you have to say, uh-oh. Uh-oh, what are they going to do? So, what do you have?
Question from the audience. What do you consider to be your best educational experience, and what made that experience so worthy?
Oh, gosh. Oh, I go all the way back to grade school with a teacher who was obviously a woman who cared about teaching us something. She really did. You had that sense of her. She really wanted you to do well. Mrs. Fuel, I look back to this day and think that she made classes good in a way because she really cared about us and really wanted us to learn something, and that was helpful. And then in high school, that's dicey stuff. I mean, the hormones kick in, and from then on it's trouble. I don't know how you keep them more involved here than elsewhere, but.
Neither do I.
Oh, here.
I think you've also said that at Stanford as an undergrad, you had a professor that inspired you to go into the law. Is
Well,
that right?
yes. I was accepted at Stanford, which was such a blessing. I didn't know how hard it was to get in, so later on I decided, well, that really was a good thing, and it was. I liked it, and you had a choice as a student about what classes to take and what subjects to take, and that was such a shock because you don't have that choice in high school or junior high or anything else. You take what you get. So that was interesting, and I did hear from many sources that there was a law school professor at Stanford who taught a class open to undergraduate students. And I heard it was really a good class, so I took it, and it was. I think because of that class, probably, I decided to apply to the law school. And surprise, surprise, they took me.
You had great educators all along the way. So going to an audience question here, how do you feel the presence of more women on the Supreme Court has changed the practice?
Well, it's changed the way it looks. My God, I go in the court occasionally when I'm in Washington. If they have oral arguments, I like to go and hear one if it sounds like it's going to be an interesting case. Some of them are deadly boring, but some of them are interesting. And if it is, and I'm there, I like to go sit in the courtroom and listen. And when I look up at that bench and see 3 women up there, that is astonishing. It really is. So that's pretty nice to see.
I agree.
I don't know that it changes the outcome. It probably doesn't. But it certainly is more representative of what we are as a people. So I like that.
Canada is still leading the way, though, right?
Yeah.
Or
Right.
majority?
Right.
So, since you began your career, do you feel that civic and government services has been significantly more opened to women? And is there more that we as educators can be doing to get girls and women engaged in civics?
Well, yeah, it's clearly more open. And how you get young people, male or female, engaged depends on your success as a teacher in getting young people interested, in making them think, oh, well, this is interesting, isn't it? And I can do something about this, or I can be involved. And that's where you all come in. You know so much more about it than I do. And it's hard. I really admire what teachers do, because you have a huge job to make some subject that could be deadly dull interesting and fun and challenging. and instructive. I mean, it's great. I hope you all give yourselves pats on the back, because people aren't going to run around doing it for you. But I'm doing it today to the extent I can, because we need teachers. We want teachers. And you are the key to the future of the students you teach and the future of our country. You really are. The people in this room make a difference.
That deserves a round of applause.
In the future of this country. So do it well.
Justice, someone would like to know if there was a particular experience or a moment that led you to the path that you set on to being the pioneer that you've become.
I don't think so. I mean, goodness, a girl on a ranch helping run the ranch is a little bit unusual, I guess. And I just was accustomed to tackling anything that was there, whether it was a typically female job or not. And maybe that just continued on in my life. I don't know. I obviously had some pretty good teachers along the way, because they taught me how to read fast and write well. Now those are the two, remember? Teach them how to read fast and write well, and you'll have done a lot of good.
Another thing people may not know is that your house in Arizona, the O'Connor House, is now a place for civil discourse.
Where civil talk leads to civic action. When I was in the legislature and ended up with a leadership post, you get a lot of very intractable issues in a legislative body. And it was so interesting to have to face that as a leader in the legislature and figure out how to get constructive resolution of out of some of these conflicts on policies and issues. And that was a great challenge. And so my husband and I had built a sun-dried adobe house. I don't know if you know about adobes, but if they're sun-dried, if you get them wet, they melt. So, you have to keep them dry. Big roof build it in a dry climate so you don't have much rain to begin with, and then protect them. That's what we had. And I had an outside area with a little place where you could have a fire. And I would, if we had some tough issues in the legislature when I was majority leader in the Senate, I would make some chalupas or some kind of good Mexican food that was easy. You could just heat it up. And I'd get some beer. And then I'd invite people on both sides of the aisle to come and sit around at my house. And I wouldn't tell them they had to do anything that mattered. But we'd be there and we'd talk, and somehow civil talk leads to civic action. So if you can keep the talk civil as you can when you're at home eating a little Mexican food and beer, you're going to make progress the next day down at the legislature with some things that need to get resolved. And that seemed to work.
There's a number of questions here in that vein, which is, do you have thoughts on, and maybe we need more chalupas and beer, but
Problem.
do you have thoughts on the challenge that we have these days with civil discourse, and thoughts on how we might be able to resolve that?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. It very much depends on the particular situation, and I can't speak for all states. My experience is obviously limited. But you have issues that are divisive, locally and nationally. And sometimes you have, at the local level at least, or the legislative level, you have legislative proposals that might actually pass, so you care about them, and you want to talk with the people representative of both sides so that you can reach some aspects of agreement by all parties, at least to some aspect of the solution. And that was where it helped to sit around casually, not making it an agenda item, but just letting it happen and try to discuss some issue that's sensitive and see if in a casual approach you don't approach more closely some kind of accord. And often you can. It's interesting to see that work out. If you don't approach it with an agenda, I have to get agreement here. Don't do that. Just make it a subject of discussion and see what happens.
So changing gears a little bit, I think we have a good question here. What advice, if any, would you have around civics for new citizens to the U.S.?
For new citizens?
For new citizens.
Oh, they learn a lot more than these students do. My God, have you seen the exam you have to take to become a citizen? Why, you give that to your students, they can't pass it. That just shows you how much we have to learn and to teach. Because the new citizen has to do a lot, but that's kind of a high standard for us to reach.
So I have a good one here. One of the most common questions I hear from my students is, and I think this is probably
Now speak
universally
up. It's hard to
true,
hear you.
when am I ever going to need this?
Okay, is that the question?
This
Or what else?
teacher
You
is
have more.
suggesting that perhaps she can now say, well, Justice O'Connor says you need to know it.
Well, the answer is you never know, but it's very apt to come up. It certainly did on many occasions for me, and it will for most of us. It's going to come up in some way or another, whether you end up being a legislator or just a citizen voting on something. These things are going to come up.
It's true. So another question, the perception or perhaps the reality among some is that the court now has become rather politicized. Would you say that this is the case, or is this part of a trend?
It's no more
that's
so
happened in
than
history?
would have been said 50 years ago or 70 years ago or something like that. Some of the issues that the court addresses are the outgrowth of political disputes. So it's not fair to label a court as political because they're talking about something that, yes, it's related to politics. The court isn't reaching out and saying, gee, we'd like to have some political issues here. They wouldn't, but they come anyway in the context of some of the issues that have to be or should be resolved.
How does the court keep the interpersonal relationships going, or how did
we
it
have
really
lunch
work?
together. That's the main way, because everybody has their own chambers. I mean, every justice has a chambers, and there is so much work to do. I mean, you could work day in and day out and nights too, and never see one of your colleagues because you have enough work to do. But it helps if you do see some of your colleagues, and so one of the ways we solve that is informally to try to have lunch together on days of oral argument and conference. And that's a help. There's a dining room upstairs that the justices use. They have their chamber's aide bring a lunch from the cafeteria. It's nothing fancy. It's what everybody else has choice of. Not very good, to tell you the truth. But get something up there anyway. And you sit around together very casually at the table. And that's a good thing. And they're not up there talking about, now how do we solve Casey versus Jones that we have to decide Friday? They don't. They avoid that. They talk much more casually about things. And that's good, because you want to have a good bonding with comfortable relations among the justices. And then they have a better shot at reaching agreement on the tough issues, and there are many of those.
There are a number of questions here on the impact of No Child Left Behind and the rise now of STEM subjects. And I think among a lot of the folks here, they want to know what they can do to help in the cause that you've put forward of making sure that civics is restored.
That really is something that is resolved it's up to your school who sets the scope of the classes you're going to teach. And it probably varies to some degree from state to state, is my guess. But whatever you have in your state, I think you should be a voice for making sure that whatever is recommended, it includes opportunities to address some of these things as teachers and in the classroom. And I hope you will, because it helps young people to start talking about some of these questions early on. It's good. They don't want to do it at first, and they're not very good at it. And it'll help them as citizens if they can be prompted to make a few comments that open up a discussion a little bit. They have to learn how to do that, you know. That isn't something they're going to know how to do. And it helps to teach young people that, oh, gee, it's fine to have more than one opinion on some question. That's a good thing. And how interesting that you brought that up, Janie. And George, what's your response? Get them to engage nicely on different sides of issues. I think they'll find it engaging and worthwhile. And most of them don't realize that it's okay to have opinions on both sides of some important issue. And they need to learn that. It's good.
Turning to iCivics, we have a question of how you decided to use video games to help teach these concepts of government and citizenship.
Well, because what do you think the kids do at night? Do they go in and turn on the TV? Isn't that what they do? So you have to go turn on the TV and have it up there. That's what I thought, anyway. And it hadn't changed yet. We'll see. Now, how much time do you have allotted for this thing?
We have a few more questions.
No, time. What is your schedule?
We have about 15 more minutes.
Fine, good. That's
Great.
what I wanted to know. Whether to give a long sentence or a short answer.
I'm used to this. So, Justice, can you...
I think he's running out of questions.
Now I'm just nervous.
No.
Just nervous. We're definitely not running out of questions. Turning back to the Supreme Court, there were a number of questions here about what you felt was either the most challenging aspect of being on the court or one of the most challenging cases you faced as a justice.
Oh, I'm not going to talk about a particular case, but some of them are really tough issues to decide, because you discover when you start researching it that there is no clear precedent of the court for answering that particular question, that you're going to have to be setting a new standard of some kind, a new answer to a question that hasn't previously been addressed. And that's very challenging. It really is. And so you just have to do the best you can to turn up the helpful answers to related questions that have been given in the past, and then try to see what you can do with this one. But it's really an exciting, interesting challenge when you have to answer some of these questions. And you hope you get it right. Maybe we don't always. In fact, surely we don't always.
I wonder if there aren't lessons that our other branches or political leaders might be able to learn from that process.
Oh, absolutely, but don't count on them. They operate differently anyway. The legislature, you all know about that, and they get in those legislative squabbles, and it goes on and on. So you're not going to help them there. But often what the legislature creates presents a new legal issue that the courts end up having to solve. That's what happens.
So as you've traveled around the country now and you visit a lot of schools, are there particular reactions from students or teachers that have really impressed you about iCivics?
No, and I don't travel around the country and get to visit a lot of schools. I wish I did. I make some trips. I was recently in California, and I went to 2 places that had students and had brief discussions, but that doesn't illuminate anything for me. I really don't get down to the nitty-gritty very often, if ever, when I travel around and visit with schools, because you don't, on those occasions, have occasion to deal with a real-life problem. I'm meeting with you, but we're not facing some classroom-type problem today that has to be dealt with, so I don't have that experience, really.
You shared with me a good story. You vacationed in Chautauqua.
Yes.
And I think you're starting now to run into students sometimes that have been exposed to iCivics.
Oh, well, that was early on when I had iCivics out at the earliest stage. I had a week in Chautauqua, if you know where that is. It's really a fun place and up in New York to the north. And in the house next to where I was staying were some grandparents from the Philadelphia area, and they had their little grandson, Charlie, with them for a week. And so I just had the first version of iCivics, and I said, Charlie, I need you to do something for me. You have a computer. Oh, yes. I said, how about taking this and working on it tonight and telling me tomorrow what you think? And so he took one of these things and apparently worked with it. And the next day I saw him, well, what did you think? Oh, it was fun. And his grandmother came out and she said, I had to go up there 6 times to get him to go to bed because he didn't want to put it down. I knew I had a winner on my hands.
That's what we want. So I think we're nearing the wrapping up point here, but folks may want to know what your continued vision is for iCivics. Where would you like to see it go?
Okay.
How can they help?
You have to be feedback to us about what works and what doesn't work, what really is effective in your classroom among the choices you have. We have quite a few choices now on iCivic, but we need practical feedback. And if you're using it, then let us know which ones are effective or producing good discussion and apparently some understanding among the students on those questions. We'd like to know that. And tell us if one is kind of a dud and not producing much, and if others are very helpful. We would like to know that, because I think we're far enough removed from the classroom not to feel confident every time that we're on the right track or right direction. And if you see other things that you identify that you think could be effectively done on an iCivics thing, let us know. We'd really like to hear. I'm very enthusiastic about iCivics, I'll tell you. Our feedback is good. And I think we see evidence today, correct me if I'm wrong, of use by at least 30,000 kids a day.
That's right.
Of some part of iCivics. Now that's pretty good. I'd like the figures to be higher because we have more than 30,000 kids out there with access to iCivics. But that's encouraging to me. And the thing that has made this possible to take to schools is we've kept it free. We're not charging for it, which is a miracle. I'm so grateful that we have not had to do that because I want it that way. And then we need your feedback to say, as to something you've used, you think it could be improved if we did thus and so, or to something we have not done, is this something you could do? You know, ask us and keep us informed a little bit as you experiencing it, as you experience using it. We'd like that if you would, because I don't get that chance to use it in the classroom. I don't see the problems that you're going to see, and you can help us.
I want to thank everyone for the wonderful questions, and please join me in thanking Justice O'Connor.
One more thing. You know, I should be applauding you. You are doing the things that matter in this country. You're teaching the young people. And I hope you know how much it's appreciated, because you're the key. You really are. So give us feedback and keep on being good teachers. It matters so much. So thanks a million.